when I was in high school, I was very interested in kind of social movement stuff. And I was young, like 14, 15, I was going to marches in New York. So.
And
yeah, I mean, so in college, I was receiving Social Security because my father passed away when I was young. And Reagan had proposed cutting the Social Security grants for people over 18 and then significantly cutting the grant size, particularly if you were in college. So I got involved in helping the progressive congressman running from New Jersey. In his campaign, I got involved in voter registration drives in New York City, and really an effort to kind of beat back the first wave of Reagan republicanism. And then in college, I got involved in anti-apartheid work on campus and trying to link that with economic justice work. And then I did some youth organizing for the year after college. Then I went to Berkeley to go to grad school in city planning and regional planning. I wasn't particularly too thrilled with the program there. It wasn't very focused on community control. And at the same time, I started to figure out that I was queer, and that was starting to come out. So a couple of different things came together, and I dropped out of graduate school. And I got this job working in Marin County Planning Department. And the woman who hired me asked me, do you want to run a campaign? Do you want to run the Jackson campaign in Berkeley? And I said, what? And she's like, well, we're looking for a campaign organizer. You're smart, you work hard, you're political, you'll work very cheap, and we need somebody. And I was like, really? So she brought me into this. She's like, yeah, but you have to go through a process. And so I went to this room, and I was like interviewed by like 8 people,
at once,
at once, like a couple of ex-Black Panthers, and it was Berkeley, so it was very left, and a lot of people were like, here I am, like, how old was I, 23, 22, and they were like, why should we hire a white boy, blah, 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 and it was really a very intensive process, but I got the job. Then I decided to come back home to New York to be closer to my family. Took like a year off and traveled and backpacked. I'm definitely not one of these organizers who started at 18 and just organized forever. I like to have fun.
Good for you.
I really don't need, life-work balance is not an issue for me. So I came back to New York, and out of nowhere, I applied for this job for the Hunger Action Network in New York State. And I remember asking my mom, I was like, it was paying nothing. And she's like, oh, just take it for a couple of months, and then you get settled back in New York, and then you'll move on to something else. So I took the job, and it was around welfare and income and hunger, really not my core issues. The organization was good, but it was an advocacy organization. Things kind of informed me as I took the job. It just didn't make sense for me to go and advocate about cuts in welfare. It was just me, just a downstate coordinator. And long story short, over a couple of years, with the support of the organizations and me doing a lot of aggressive fundraising, I built the organization up to about 4 staff people. We started off by getting a community food and nutrition program grant, then I raised money for a Jesuit volunteer corps member, and then we raised money for a Long Island organizer and a couple of other people. So we started to build a base. I developed this program called the Client Empowerment Program, which was about empowering people in food programs. I just started doing organizing and building something, and I didn't know what it just made sense. It wasn't like, someone's like, oh, you built an organization. I was like, whatever, it's what I did, like what else would I do? So, that happened, and then a group of us organized this demonstration at the Democratic Convention to focus on foods, jobs, and housing. And we write about this in the book that I wrote, Tools for Radical Democracy. But, long story short, it was a bunch of advocates who were organizing it, and we had a plan to shut down all the food pantries and soup kitchens in New York City on a day and kind of send everybody to convention and feed people there. And there was a homeless woman, there was a homeless activist. She was a mother with kids who had done this big action at a place called the Brooklyn Arms. And she showed up at the meeting, and she's like, what the hell are you, white advocates talking about what to do about poor people? Do you engage people? Do you talk to us? So I think that was one of those issues where, it was just kind of a continual, not a very long process because I got it pretty quickly, but a continual process that if you didn't involve community, if community members weren't leading organizations and being involved as partners, that it wasn't going to work. So that was one of the places where made me think about leadership and community control, and then that was when me and Joan started to conceive of this thing that would eventually become Community Voices Heard. We were trying to figure out how to build a welfare rights group, and then we were lucky enough and blessed enough to meet Gail Aska, who was then the third co-founder, who was a woman on welfare, who was from Harlem and wanted to express her power. And the three of us then built the organization. And it was just a learning process, and so 10 years as first the only organizer, then eventually the director, and then 2 years of building the organization at Hunger Action Network. I feel very proud of the fact that I built one of the strongest organizations in the country of low-income people. That I founded it, that I built it, that it's still around, that it's more powerful now than when I left it.
Yes.
I'm very proud of that. Would I have preferred to, at the end of the day, I think I would have preferred to put 20 years of my life into building a left-wing party that was really seeking power. I mean, of course, it wasn't students on college campuses who ended apartheid. It was people in South Africa who ended apartheid. But the student movements in the colleges in the 80s really raised the issue of apartheid to some degree. No one ever knew about apartheid. Americans didn't know. We got divestment. So it raised the issues in a very strong and powerful, supportive way. And we were successful. We got colleges to divest. It became an issue. It brought in the broader community, right? I mean, AIDS isn't cured, but ACT UP definitely was a successful movement in that it opened up the regulatory process, how the Food and Drug Administration operated, the millions of people who are alive today because of the drugs that exist. Those drugs came out sooner and quicker because of ACT UP, which was a militant direct action organization. I think there are certain constituencies and certain issues that don't have the luxury of relational organizing, right? Yeah. And so I believe it's important to bring the components of relational organizing into movement work. Organizing very low-income people, welfare mothers, we didn't have the luxury of doing a year of one-on-ones. We had to move people directly to action. Yeah. And so what was a little bit different about what we did was that we also had a big focus on leadership development and on relational building, which built, I think a lot of people were always amazed at both the number of leaders that we had and the quality of leaders that we had. And that was because we put a lot of effort into leadership development and relational building. So we would do one-on-ones, we would do home visits, we would do trainings that we, stole right from IAF, and IAF actually came in and did our first leadership training. But we also knew that if we didn't put people into opposition against power, even if they didn't win something, they had to feel like their power was being used and something was moving, that we would lose people. And so I think that's the piece about movement that I really learned. I would also say there's always this question around your experience and who you are and like your culture, right? So I'm Greek, my family was all about yelling and screaming and open democracy and big open forums. ACT UP was like that, and so for me, I really don't like 5 or 6 people making democratic decisions and then handing out the orders. I prefer 600 people getting into a room and hammering out how you do democracy that way.
Numbers do matter.
I am a total numbers queen. I mean. And I think that numbers matter, but it doesn't always have to be large numbers. But you have to know what your actual numbers are, right? So if you know you're going to have 20 members come out, then you design an action that's for 20 members. I mean, CVH won, in our early days, we won stuff with between 10 to 15 hardcore militant leaders. Sometimes it was enough to have 15 or 20 militant leaders. Sometimes we mobilized larger numbers, but it was knowing when we needed our numbers and when we didn't need our numbers. We didn't have to mobilize 200 people or 100 people all the time, but we had to mobilize them at the right time. And so as long as we were able to mobilize those members maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and then we had 15 to 20 core members who could speak to the issues, be at meetings, people thought we were a lot larger than we actually were. My family was very political. My mom was the daughter of immigrants, and she had to work. My father worked in a factory 18 hours a day. Like I don't come from this from a guilt-ridden perspective. I come from this by someone who grew up working class, or maybe a little bit higher than working class after a while. But yeah, I mean, we were a political family. I'm a political person. Like, I'm in this fight for myself as well as other people.
And what are you most proud of?
I don't know if this is the thing I'm most proud of, but I feel that, you know, my work got at least 12,000 jobs created for women on welfare that got paid. You know, it wasn't me alone, absolutely, but
right.
my leadership helped us to get there and played a critical role in it. And so I feel like I got, you know, maybe they weren't the best jobs, maybe there were issues with the jobs, but they were better than workfare. And, you know, so when members got jobs, and I know my work helped that to happen, right? So that makes me feel, I don't think that's proud, I think that makes me feel like, okay, I wasn't a poverty pimp.
Yes.
It means like I got paid, and it was like, okay, I got paid, I got my job, I think the things that make me proud, it's not even proud, I think the things that I feel like are my biggest good accomplishments is that I was one of the co-founders of an organization that built and won things, and that it's stronger, better, and bigger now than when I left. It is like amazing to me. I mean, I opened up the newsletter and like I was like, oh my God, you guys got 1.5 million back in clawbacks from this economic development thing. I mean, I helped to raise. That was my vision. I mean, and that was my very clearly, and I helped to begin to develop that vision. And sometimes people were like, what do you mean statewide? What do you mean an electoral project? What do you mean this, right? And so I helped to form that vision, and then I helped to raise money for that vision, and I helped to develop the leadership both on staff and on the board to accomplish that vision. But it is not me anymore. And the fact that organization, that I call there and people don't even know who I am, is great. It's like, I'll write my check, and I owe them a check. And whenever anyone wants to ask me what I think, that's great. But I mean, that definitely is one of my accomplishments. And I think the other accomplishments that I have is particularly with the women that I met at the beginning of CVH, and that, you always have that kind of romanticized view of that first organizing committee, and when you're the only organizer, and you have those relationships. That Gail passed away regrettably, but all those women are just in so much better parts of their lives, and their experience at CVH and the work and the power and the things that CVH changed help them accomplish that. Diane's a nurse making, like, I don't know, gobs of money. She has, this huge SUV, and Kim and Bessie are doing good work, and LaDon's doing movement stuff. Dusha is working at DC. Like all these people. I mean, I just think it's that, and then also, one time I was sitting in a meeting in New York City, and I realized like 5 of the people in the meeting had come through, their real first organizing efforts were at CVH.
What do you